The scratching was back. Michael froze on his concrete bed, staring at the steel door. At first he thought it was just in his head, like so many other sounds that haunted him at night. But no, this was different. The scratching was real. It was coming from the corner of his cell. The sound was sharp, slow and steady, like claws dragging across stone. He pressed his back against the wall, his chest rising and falling with quick breaths. He had been inside solitary for years, cut off from the world, cut off from people. His mind often played tricks on him. But tonight, the noise was too loud to ignore. He whispered to himself, "It can't be real. It can't be real." And then, the sound stopped. The silence was worse than the scratching. He waited, heart pounding. Then, a soft tap came from the inside of the wall, right beside his bed. Michael's eyes widened. He wasn't alone. Michael Harris had once lived a very different life. He grew up in Detroit, where crime was just another part of the streets. Robbery, gang fights, drugs. It was all around him. By the time he was 22, he had already been arrested more than once. But the last time was different. He was caught after a violent robbery, and the judge sent him somewhere that very few ever returned from. The name of the place was ADX Florence, the most secure prison in the United States. Some called it the Alcatraz of the Rockies. Others called it a clean version of hell. When Michael first arrived, he thought he could handle it. He was tough. He had survived fights in county jails, riots in state prisons, and dangerous men on the outside. But ADX was not about fights. It was not about gangs. It was about silence. It was about being locked inside a concrete box for 23 hours a day, with no human touch, no human voice, no one to remind you that you were still alive. His cell was small, only 7 feet wide and 12 feet long. The bed was a slab of concrete with a thin mattress. The toilet was steel. The walls were grey. The window was only 4 inches wide, and all he could see through it was a piece of sky. Every door, every corner, every hallway screamed one thing: "You are never leaving here." Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Michael counted the cracks in the wall. He counted his steps from the door to the bed. He talked to himself just to hear his own voice. He thought about his family, but their faces began to fade in his memory. He would close his eyes and try to picture them, but the images were blurry, like a dream he couldn't hold on to. The first time he heard the whispers, he laughed. He told himself it was just the air vents. But night after night they came back. Sometimes faint, sometimes louder. A voice calling his name, a voice he could never quite recognize. Then came the screams. One night, he heard another inmate's cry tear through the halls. It was the kind of scream that made your blood run cold. He pressed his ear against the door, trying to listen. Then, silence. Hours later, he saw guards rolling a stretcher down the hall. On it was a man strapped down, eyes wide, mouth open, shaking like he had seen a ghost. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the stretcher, about the man's face, about the screams, and just when he thought he was safe in his silence, the scratching inside his own cell began. Michael held his breath, staring at the corner of the room. The scratching grew louder. He pressed himself against the opposite wall, wishing he could escape, but there was nowhere to go. The cell was a cage, and he was trapped inside. His mind raced. Was it a rat? Was it just the sound of pipes behind the walls? Or was it something worse? He stepped closer, each foot heavy on the concrete floor. When he reached the corner, he leaned down. The noise stopped. He pressed his ear against the wall. Nothing. Just silence. Then, suddenly, 3 sharp knocks echoed through the concrete. Knock, knock, knock. Michael jumped back. his heart slamming against his chest. Someone, or something, was on the other side. He shouted, "Who's there?" No answer. Just silence. The next morning, when the guard slid his tray through the slot, Michael asked if there was anyone in the cell next to him. The guard gave a small grin. Empty. And then he walked away. Empty. That word followed Michael the rest of the day. If the cell was empty, who had knocked? Who was scratching? He tried to convince himself it was all in his head, just another trick of the mind. Solitary had broken stronger men than him. Maybe now it was breaking him too. But the more he tried to ignore it, the worse it got. At night, the whispers came back. Sometimes they called his name. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they cried. He pressed his hands over his ears, but the sounds were still there. One evening, Michael sat on the floor with his knees pulled tight to his chest. He whispered, "You're not real. You're not real." The walls didn't answer, but the air felt heavy, pressing down on him. He thought about his old life, about the gang, the crimes, the mistakes that had brought him here. If this was punishment, it was worse than he had ever imagined. Days blurred together. The scratching came and went. The whispers grew louder. Michael stopped talking to the guards. He stopped trying to count the cracks on the walls. He no longer cared what time of day it was. The world outside his cell didn't feel real anymore. Then came the night when everything changed. He woke up to the sound of his cell door clicking. Not the slot, not the rattle of chains, but the door itself. Slowly it opened, the steel grinding against the floor. Michael froze, his body stiff with fear. His mind screamed at him to move, to shout, to call for the guards. But he couldn't. Through the crack of the open door he saw nothing but darkness. A cold breeze swept in, and the whispers returned, louder than ever. They filled his head, circling him, pulling him toward the open space. Michael took one step forward, then stopped, and the door slammed shut. The sound echoed through the halls, leaving Michael in silence once again. But this time, he knew the silence wasn't empty. Something else was inside with him. End of story.